The council chamber was filled with angry voices. Ambassador Minho sat quietly in his seat, listening to the argument that had been going on for 3 hours. Two species were fighting over a small planet rich with minerals. The Dravok wanted it because their ancestors had lived there 1,000 years ago. The Hilmar wanted it because they had discovered the minerals first. Both sides refused to share. Minho had heard arguments like this many times before. In his 15 years as the human ambassador, he had listened to countless disputes. Some were solved with careful words and patience. Others ended badly. This one felt like it would end badly. Counselor Vrax, a tall reptilian creature from the Kelthari species, stood up and spoke loudly. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights. He pointed at the Hilmar representative with one clawed finger. "The Hilmar are greedy thieves," Vrax said. "They take what belongs to others and call it discovery. The Dravok have the rightful claim." The Hilmar ambassador jumped to his feet. His fur bristled with anger. "The Dravok abandoned that world centuries ago. We found it empty. We did the work."
"The minerals are ours."
More voices joined in. The chamber became chaos. High Speaker Ulthan, the ancient crystalline being who led the council, tried to restore order. His voice echoed like wind chimes, but no one was listening. Minho raised his hand slowly. Ulthan saw him and called for silence. The room gradually quieted. "I have a proposal," Minho said in his calm voice. "The planet could be jointly administered. Both the Dravok and Hilmar would share the mining rights. Human peacekeepers could oversee the operations to ensure fairness. The profits would be split equally." For a moment, the room was quiet. Then Vrax laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Of course the humans suggest compromise," Vrax said mockingly. "You always do. You insert yourselves into every conflict, pretending to be wise peacemakers. But you are just soft and weak. The galaxy does not need your constant interference." Several other counselors nodded in agreement. The Dravok representative said the proposal was insulting. The Hilmar representative said sharing was unacceptable. Within minutes, Minho's idea was rejected by both sides. Minho did not argue. He simply nodded and sat back down. Commander Dayon, who was sitting beside him, leaned over and whispered, "They will regret this." Minho said nothing. He had heard similar words many times. The meeting ended with no solution. Both species left angry. War seemed certain. That evening, Minho returned to the human embassy section of the massive space station. The hallways were quiet. Most of the staff had already left for the day. He walked into his office and stood by the window looking out at the stars. Commander Dayon appeared in the doorway. "You are thinking about leaving, are you not?" she asked. Minho turned to face her. "We have given everything to this council. Our diplomats work day and night to prevent wars. Our peacekeepers risk their lives in dangerous places. Our trade negotiators build bridges between species that hate each other. And for what? To be mocked? To be called weak?" Dayon crossed her arms. "So what do? We leave," Minho said quietly. "Not with anger. Not with threats. We just leave. Let them see what happens without us." The next morning, Minho sent a coded message to Earth. The response came quickly. Humanity's government had been discussing this possibility for months. They were tired too. Tired of being unappreciated. Tired of doing thankless work. The decision was made. Over the next 3 days, humanity began to withdraw. It was done quietly and efficiently. Human diplomats packed their offices. Trade Minister G1 canceled all ongoing negotiations. She sent polite messages to her contacts explaining that humanity was ending its trade mediation services. Commander Dayon recalled all human peacekeeping forces. Troops stationed on disputed borders received orders to return home. Ships that had been patrolling dangerous zones turned around and headed back to human space. The withdrawal was so smooth that most council members did not notice at first. Humans had always been quiet workers. They did their jobs without seeking attention. Now they were leaving the same way. On the third day, Minho walked through the empty human embassy one last time. The walls were bare. The desks were clean. Everything had been packed and loaded onto transport ships. He stood in the main hall and remembered all the meetings that had taken place here. All the late nights spent negotiating peace. All the compromises reached. All the wars prevented. Dayon joined him. "Ready to go?" she asked. Minho nodded. Together they walked to the docking bay where the last human ship was waiting. As they boarded, Minho took one final look at the council station. He felt no anger, only sadness, and perhaps a little bit of relief. Before the ship departed, Minho recorded a simple message and sent it to the Council's central database. It said, "Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately. We wish you all well." There were no explanations, no accusations, no demands, just a quiet farewell. The human ships jumped to faster than light speed and vanished into the darkness of space. The embassy wing of the station went dark. For the first time in over a century, there were no humans on the council. The next day, a few counselors noticed the empty seats where human representatives used to sit. Most ignored it. Counselor Vrax made a joke about humans being too sensitive. High Speaker Olthen expressed mild disappointment, but assumed it was just a temporary political move. Humans would come back eventually. They always did. The council continued its regular business. There was still arguing, still disagreement, still conflict, but that was normal. That was how things had always been. Only a few voices expressed concern. The Trevani ambassador, an elderly diplomat whose species had nearly destroyed itself in civil war decades ago, stood up during a session. "What will happen to the peacekeeping missions?" she asked. "Who will mediate the Drevok-Hilmar dispute now?" No one had an answer. The question was uncomfortable, so it was ignored. The council moved on to other topics. In the weeks that followed, a few more people began to notice small changes. Trade negotiations that were supposed to happen did not happen. Disputes that would normally be mediated by humans were left unresolved. Peacekeepers who used to prevent border conflicts were gone, but these were small things, barely noticeable. The galaxy was huge. Surely someone else could handle these minor tasks. The council had thousands of species. Humanity was just one of them. How important could they really be? The answer to that question would become clear soon enough. 3 months had passed since humanity left the council. At first, nothing seemed different. The council met. Debates happened. Decisions were made or not made. Life continued as normal, but slowly cracks began to appear. The mining dispute between the Drevok and Hilmar was the first crack to widen into something dangerous. Without human peacekeepers on the ground, tensions had risen. Small fights broke out between workers. Equipment was sabotaged. Ships were fired upon. Then one morning, everything exploded. The Drevok military launched a surprise attack on the mining colony. Their warships appeared without warning and began bombarding Hilmar positions. The Hilmar fought back with fury, sending their own fleet to retaliate. Within days, what had been a simple disagreement became a full war. Thousands died in the first week alone. The mining colony was destroyed. Nearby systems were evacuated as the fighting spread. The council called emergency meetings. High Speaker Olthen tried to organize a ceasefire. He sent messages to both sides, begging them to stop. But neither side would listen. The Drevok demanded complete control of the planet. The Hilmar refused to give up their claim. Every proposal was rejected. In the past, humans would have been there. They would have shuttled between both fleets. They would have found common ground. They would have built trust slowly, patiently, until peace was possible. But there were no humans now. No one else had their skill. No one else had their patience. The war continued. Refugee ships fled the combat zones, overloaded with families who had lost everything. These ships arrived at nearby stations begging for help. But the stations were not prepared. They did not have enough food, medicine, or space. Meanwhile, other problems were growing. The Corn Consortium, a major trade alliance that connected dozens of species, began to fall apart. For years, human trade ministers had maintained delicate agreements between member species. They had negotiated prices, resolved disputes, and ensured fairness. Now, without human oversight, old grudges resurfaced. The Zelthi accused the Murnoch of hoarding medical supplies and charging unfair prices. The Murnoch said the Zelthi were lying and threatened to leave the consortium entirely. Other species took sides. Arguments became bitter. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly broke down. Ships carrying vital supplies were delayed or turned back. Agricultural worlds that depended on imported food began to run short. Medical supplies could not reach hospitals. Factories shut down because they lacked raw materials. Back in the council chamber, meetings became more chaotic. Species that had worked together for years now argued constantly. The Keltari and the Vereen, who had very different ways of communicating, could no longer understand each other. In the past, human diplomats had translated not just words, but meaning and cultural context. They had bridged the gaps. Without them, misunderstandings multiplied. High Speaker Olthen struggled to maintain order. Sessions ended with nothing accomplished. Votes failed, alliances crumbled. The spirit of cooperation that had defined the council was dying. Councillor Vrax noticed the changes, though he did not want to admit it. He sat in his office one evening reviewing reports. The war, the trade collapse, the diplomatic failures, all happening at once. His assistant, a younger Kelthari named Revik, entered the room. "The Dravak are asking for military support," Revik said. "They want us to send ships to help them." Vrax considered it. The Dravak were his allies. Supporting them made sense. But when he tried to build consensus in the council, he failed. Other species refused. They had their own concerns. They did not want to get involved. In the past, Vrax would have blamed the humans for complicating things. But now the humans were gone and things were not simpler. They were worse. Much worse. That night, Vrax could not sleep. He opened his computer and began searching through council records. He looked at old disputes, old negotiations, old crises, and he began to see a pattern. Humans had been involved in nearly every successful peace agreement for the past 100 years. They had mediated territorial disputes. They had prevented trade wars. They had stopped conflicts before they started. Their names appeared again and again in the records, quiet and unassuming. Vrax felt something uncomfortable in his chest. Was it possible he had been wrong? Had humans actually been essential? Across the station, Ambassador Teal of the Trevani was having similar thoughts. He was older than most diplomats, with silver hair and tired eyes. He had served on the council for 30 years. He remembered when his own people had nearly destroyed themselves in a brutal civil war. It had been human negotiators who saved the Trevani. They had spent months building trust between the warring factions. They had listened to both sides without judgment. They had found solutions that no one else could see. Because of them, the Trevani survived. Teal watched the current crisis unfold and saw history repeating itself. The Dravak and Hilmar were making the same mistakes his people had made. But this time there were no humans to stop the cycle. He decided to take action. During the next council session, Teal stood and addressed the chamber. His voice was quiet but firm. "We need to send a delegation to human space," he said. "We need to ask them to return." The chamber fell silent. Then several councillors began to laugh. Others looked angry. Councillor Vrax surprised everyone by not laughing. Instead, he said, "Perhaps we should consider it." But the majority disagreed. One councillor stood and said, "We do not need humans. They left because they were weak. We are better without them." Others nodded. Pride was stronger than wisdom. The proposal was rejected. After the session ended, Teal walked slowly back to his quarters. He felt defeated. The galaxy was falling apart and no one wanted to admit it. Vrax found him in the hallway. The two had never spoken much before. They came from very different worlds. But now they shared a common understanding. "You were right," Vrax said quietly. "We need them. I was too proud to see it before." Teal nodded. "But they will not listen. Not yet. Things will have to get worse before they understand." "How much worse?" Vrax asked. Teal looked out at the stars through the station windows. "Much worse, I fear." He was right. The Dravak-Hilmar War continued to escalate. More species were drawn into the conflict as alliances were activated. What began as a border dispute was becoming something far larger. The trade networks continued to collapse. Famine spread on worlds that depended on imports. Medical crises erupted as supplies ran out. Refugee camps overflowed with homeless families. And in the council chamber, nothing was accomplished. Every session ended in argument. Every proposal failed. The Great Galactic Council, which had maintained peace for centuries, was paralyzed. High Speaker Olthen called Vrax and Teal to his private chambers. The ancient being looked tired, which was unusual. Crystalline beings did not normally show fatigue. "I have been alive for many centuries," Olthen said. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed countless wars. But I have never seen the council so broken. What do we do?" Vrax asked. Olthen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We wait, and we hope that wisdom arrives before catastrophe does." But deep down, all three of them feared that catastrophe would come first. 6 months after humanity departed, the galaxy was burning. The Dravok-Hilmar War had spread beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a dispute over one planet now involved 8 different species across 12 star systems. Alliances were called upon. Old treaties were activated. Species that had been at peace for generations found themselves at war. Entire planets were evacuated. Orbital stations were destroyed. Millions had died already, and the death toll climbed every day. The space lanes were filled with refugee ships, desperate families fleeing the combat zones with whatever they could carry. But the Dravok-Hilmar conflict was not the only war. 3 other major disputes had erupted into violence. The Zentari and the Kulvan fought over territorial boundaries. The Reshik and the Vondri clashed over ideological differences. The Marnoth and the Kellics competed for control of vital trade routes. Each conflict could have been prevented. Each one had warning signs that were ignored. In the past, human mediators would have stepped in early, before tensions boiled over. They would have found solutions. They would have built bridges. But there were no humans now, and the galaxy was paying the price. The council met constantly but accomplished nothing. Every session descended into shouting matches. Every proposal was blocked by one faction or another. High Speaker Olthan tried desperately to maintain order, but his authority was crumbling. Species no longer respected the council's decisions. The humanitarian crisis was overwhelming. Billions of refugees had nowhere to go. Stations and planets that accepted them were quickly overrun. There was not enough food, not enough medicine, not enough shelter. Children slept in hallways. The sick went untreated. The dead were left unburied. Then plague broke out. It started in one overcrowded refugee camp and spread rapidly. The disease was not particularly deadly under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. Without proper medical care, without clean water, without adequate nutrition, it became a killer. Medical supplies existed, but they could not get through. The trade networks that once moved goods efficiently across the galaxy were completely broken. Ships were delayed or turned back at borders. Species hoarded resources for themselves. The cooperative spirit that had defined the Council era was gone. Councillor Vrax walked through one of the refugee sections of the station. He had never done this before. As a high-ranking councillor, he had always stayed in the secure, clean diplomatic zones. But something compelled him to see the reality of what was happening. The hallways were packed with families. Children cried. Parents looked defeated. The sick lay on makeshift beds, coughing. The smell was terrible. Vrax felt sick himself, not from the disease, but from shame. A small child, no more than 5 years old, tugged on his robe. The child's species was Trevani. Her face was thin from hunger. Please help us, she said in a weak voice. We are so hungry. Vrax knelt down. He had no food to give her. He had no medicine. He had nothing but empty words. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. The child's mother came and took her hand, leading her away. Vrax stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. This was his fault. Not his alone, but he bore responsibility. He had mocked the humans. He had dismissed their work. He had called them weak. Now he understood. The humans had not been weak. They had been strong in ways he had failed to see. Their strength was not in weapons or military might. It was in patience, in empathy, in the willingness to do difficult, thankless work. Vrax returned to his office and called Ambassador Teal. We need to do something, Vrax said. We cannot wait any longer. The Council is dying. The galaxy is dying, Teal agreed. Together they began gathering evidence. They went through Council archives, pulling every record of human involvement in diplomatic efforts. They documented every peace treaty, every trade agreement, every crisis that had been averted. The numbers were staggering. In the last century, humans had mediated over 200 conflicts. They had negotiated thousands of trade agreements. They had created cultural exchange programs that built understanding between dozens of species. They had trained diplomats from other species in mediation techniques. All of this work had been invisible. It happened quietly behind the scenes. No one paid attention to it because it worked so well. The machinery of peace ran smoothly, so people forgot it was there. They forgot it needed maintenance. They forgot it could break. Now it was broken, and everyone could see the results. Vrax and Teal compiled their findings into a report. They presented it to High Speaker Olthan in his private chambers. Olthan read it slowly, his crystalline form seeming to dim as he absorbed the information. I was blind, Olthan said quietly. We all were. Humans were the foundation of everything we built, and we did not even notice. What do we do now? Vrax asked. Olthan looked at both of them. We go to them. We humble ourselves. We beg them to return. But the council must approve it, Tail said. They voted against it before. Olthan straightened himself. Then we will make them see. We will show them this report. We will make them face what they have done. And if they still refuse, then the council truly deserves to fall. The next day, an emergency full council session was called. Every species sent their representatives. The chamber was packed. Tension filled the air. Olthan began by showing images from the refugee camps. The sick children, the desperate families, the overcrowded hallways. Some counselors looked away. Others watched in uncomfortable silence. Then Vrax presented the report. He spoke for 2 hours, detailing every human contribution to galactic peace. He showed how conflicts had been resolved in the past and how they were spiraling out of control now. He showed the trade networks that had thrived with human oversight and were now collapsed. Finally, Tail spoke. His voice was heavy with emotion. My people nearly destroyed themselves in war, he said. Humans saved us. They spent months building trust between our factions. They found solutions we could not see. They gave us a future. Now I watch the Dravok and Hilmar make the same mistakes we made. But there are no humans to stop them. There is no one to build bridges. The chamber was silent. Then one counselor stood. It was the Kelthari representative who had laughed at the earlier proposal. He looked older now, tired. I was wrong, he said simply. We were all wrong. We need them. Others began to nod. The evidence was overwhelming. The crisis was undeniable. Pride was no longer enough to sustain denial, but some still resisted. A counselor from the Dravok stood and said, Why should we beg? Let the humans see what they have done by abandoning us. Vrax rose to respond. His voice was calm but firm. They did not abandon us. We pushed them away. We mocked them. We took their work for granted. They gave everything and we gave nothing in return. The fault is ours, not theirs. The debate continued for hours. But slowly the momentum shifted. More counselors spoke in favor of reaching out to humanity. Even those who had opposed it before began to waver. Finally, a vote was called. The proposal was simple. Send a delegation to human space to ask them to return to the council. The vote passed. Not unanimously, but it passed. Olthan appointed Vrax and Teal to lead the delegation. Others would join them, representing different species and perspectives. They would leave within the week. As the session ended, Vrax felt both hope and dread. Hope that humanity might agree to return, dread that they might refuse. And if they refused, he could not blame them. The galaxy had failed them once. Why would they risk being failed again? The delegation ship traveled through the void between stars. Inside, Counselor Vrax stood by a window watching the streaks of light that marked faster-than-light travel. He had made many journeys in his long career, but none felt as important as this one. Ambassador Tail joined him at the window. The old Trevani diplomat looked tired. He had not slept well since they left the council station. Are you nervous? Tail asked. Vrax nodded. I have faced many difficult negotiations. I have argued with warlords and tyrants, but I have never had to apologize before. I have never had to admit I was so completely wrong. Tail smiled sadly. Pride is a heavy thing to carry, but it is even heavier to put down. The ship emerged from faster-than-light travel near Earth's solar system. The delegation had sent messages ahead, requesting a meeting with humanity's government. The response had been polite but cool. They would be received, but there were no promises. As they approached Earth, Vrax studied the planet through the ship's sensors. It was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green continents. White clouds swirled across its surface. He had never visited human worlds before. He realized he knew very little about them. The ship docked at a large orbital station. Human officials met them with courteous efficiency. There were no hostile actions, but there was no warmth either. The delegation was guided to guest quarters and told that meetings would begin the following day. That night, Vrax could not sleep. He paced his room, thinking about what he would say. How do you apologize for decades of dismissiveness? How do you ask someone to return to a place where they were not valued? Morning came. The delegation was taken to a conference room in the government district. The room was simple but elegant. Large windows showed the curve of Earth below. Vrax noticed small details. Art on the walls showing diverse human cultures. Plants growing in corners, natural light filling the space. It felt peaceful. Then Prime Minister Soo-hyun entered. She was a woman in her 50s with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. She moved with quiet confidence. Behind her came several advisors, including a familiar face, Ambassador Minho. He looked the same as when Vrax had last seen him, though perhaps a bit more relaxed. Minho nodded politely to the delegation but did not smile. Everyone sat down. Prime Minister Soo-hyun spoke first. "Welcome to Earth. We have received your request to meet. We are listening." Her tone was neutral. Not hostile, but not friendly. She was giving them nothing for free. Tail spoke first. He explained the situation. The wars, the humanitarian crisis, the collapse of trade networks, the paralysis of the Council. He spoke calmly but did not hide the severity. "The galaxy is suffering," he said, "and we have come to understand that much of this suffering could have been prevented if humanity were still part of the Council." Soo-hyun listened without interrupting. When Tail finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why did humanity leave in the first place?" The question hung in the air. It was not accusatory, but it demanded honesty. Vrax took a deep breath. This was his moment. "Because of people like me," he said. "Because we dismissed your contributions. We mocked your methods. We called you weak when you were actually strong in ways we did not understand. Your diplomats worked tirelessly to prevent wars, and we never thanked them. Your peacekeepers risked their lives, and we took them for granted. Your trade ministers held the galaxy together, and we did not even notice." He paused, feeling emotion rise in his chest. "I was wrong. We were all wrong. And I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Soo-hyun's expression softened slightly, but she did not speak yet. Minho, however, nodded slowly. He had heard many apologies in his career. This one felt genuine. Soo-hyun turned to Minho. "You were there. What do you think?" Minho considered carefully. "I believe them," he said. "The crisis they describe is real, and I believe their regret is sincere. But sincerity is not enough. The question is, what has changed? If we return, will we be valued? Or will we fall back into the same patterns?" "That is the right question," Soo-hyun said. She looked at the delegation. "Why should we return? What would be different?" Tail spoke again. "The Council is willing to implement reforms. Greater representation for humanity. Mandatory mediation protocols for disputes. Recognition of the work you do, not just in words but in action." Soo-hyun listened. "Those are good starts, but we need more than promises. We need guarantees. We need the Council to understand that what we do is valuable, essential work. We need to be treated as partners, not as servants who clean up everyone else's messes." Vrax leaned forward. "You will have that. I will personally ensure it, and if I fail, you can leave again. But please give us another chance. The galaxy needs you." Soo-hyun stood and walked to the window. She looked down at Earth, the planet humanity had called home for millennia. "We did not leave out of anger," she said quietly. "We left because we were exhausted. Exhausted from giving so much and receiving so little. Exhausted from being undervalued." She turned back to face them. "But we also left because we care. We care about peace. We care about preventing suffering. That is who we are. It is in our nature to build bridges. So here are our terms. Equal representation on the Council. Authority to enforce mediation in disputes. Recognition and compensation for the work our diplomats do. Cultural exchange programs to help other species develop their own mediation skills. And most importantly, a commitment from every member species to value diplomacy over force." Tail and Vrax looked at each other. Then Tail said, "We accept all of your terms." Without hesitation, Vrax added, "I will take these terms back to the Council. I will fight for every one of them. And I believe they will accept because the alternative is the end of the Council itself." Soo-hyun nodded slowly. "Then we will consider returning. But we need to see action, not just words. Bring us a signed agreement from the Council. Show us that things will truly be different." She extended her hand to Vrax. It was a human gesture of agreement. Vrax took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Before the delegation left, Minho asked to speak with Vrax privately. They walked in a garden outside the government building. Trees grew around them, birds sang in the branches. It was peaceful in a way the Council station never was. "I believed you," Minho said. "Your apology was real. But I want you to understand something. What we do, this work of diplomacy and mediation, it is not easy. It requires patience that most species do not have. It requires empathy that must be constantly renewed. It requires seeing the best in others even when they show you their worst. I understand that now, Vrax said. I did not before, but I do now. Minho nodded. Good. Because if we return, we will need allies. People who understand the value of this work. People who will support us when things get difficult. You will have that ally in me, Vrax said firmly. I promise you. The two stood there for a moment looking at each other. Once they had been opponents. Now they were something else. Not quite friends yet, but perhaps the beginning of friendship. The delegation returned to their ship. As they departed Earth's orbit, Vrax felt something he had not felt in months. Hope. Tail sat beside him. Do you think the Council will accept the terms? Vrax looked at the stars ahead. They will, he said, because they must. And because we will make them see that this is the only path forward. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying humanity's terms back to a council that desperately needed them. The council chamber was more crowded than it had been in months. Every species had sent representatives. The air hummed with nervous energy. Everyone knew this was a critical moment. Councillor Vrax stood at the center podium holding a data tablet containing humanity's terms. Ambassador Tail stood beside him for support. High Speaker Olthan sat in his elevated seat, watching with ancient eyes. Vrax began to speak. His voice was clear and strong. We have returned from human space. Prime Minister Suhyun has agreed to consider humanity's return to the Council, but they have conditions. Conditions that we must accept if we want their help. He read through the terms one by one. Equal representation, mandatory mediation protocols, recognition and compensation for diplomatic work, cultural exchange programs, a commitment to diplomacy over force. Some counselors nodded immediately. These were the species suffering most from the crisis. They understood the urgency, but others looked uncomfortable. Pride was still a strong force. A counselor from the Reshik species stood up. These terms give humans too much power. Why should we grant them special status? They left us. They abandoned the council. Vrax felt anger flash through him, but he controlled it. He had learned patience from watching humans. No, he said firmly. We abandoned them. We took their work for granted. We dismissed their contributions. They left because we failed them, not the other way around. Another counselor spoke. But if we accept these terms, we admit weakness. We admit that we cannot function without them. Tail stood and addressed the chamber. Is it weak to recognize your limitations? Is it weak to value those who help you? I say it is the opposite. It takes strength to admit when you are wrong. It takes wisdom to learn from your mistakes. The debate continued for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. The chamber grew hot and tense. Then suddenly alarms began to sound. An emergency message came through. The Dravok-Hilmar War had reached a new level of horror. The Dravok had launched a planetary bombardment. Not just military targets, but cities, civilian centers. Millions of people were dead or dying. The chamber fell silent as images appeared on the screens. Burning cities, refugee ships fleeing desperately, children crying in the rubble. The scale of the tragedy was overwhelming. A counselor from the Keltari species stood. She had opposed the terms minutes before. Now her voice shook. We are watching the galaxy die, she said, and we sit here arguing about pride, about power, about status, while people suffer and die. She turned to face Vrax. I was wrong. You are right. We need humanity, not because they are powerful, but because they understand something we do not. They understand how to prevent this, how to stop the cycle of violence before it begins. Other counselors began to stand. One by one, they spoke in favor of accepting the terms. The mood in the chamber shifted. Pride gave way to desperation, and desperation gave way to clarity. High Speaker Olthan called for a vote. The question was simple. Do we accept humanity's terms and invite them to return? The vote was not unanimous. Some still refused, but the majority voted yes. The terms were accepted. A message was sent to Earth immediately. Prime Minister Suhyun received it within hours. She called her advisors together, including Ambassador Minho and Commander Daeun. The Council has accepted all of our terms, Suhyun said. They want us to return. The question is, should we? Commander Daeun spoke first. The military situation is catastrophic. If we send peacekeepers now, we can save lives. Thousands, maybe millions, but only if we act quickly. Minho was more cautious. We must ensure that this time is different. We must guarantee that our people will be treated with respect, that their work will be valued. Soo-hyun nodded. We will return, but we will return on our terms as equals. We will build partnerships, not dependencies. We will teach others our methods so they can eventually handle conflicts themselves. We will not be taken for granted again. She looked at Minho. Will you go back? Minho had been considering this question since the delegation left. He had enjoyed his retirement, the peace and quiet, but he also knew that his skills were needed. That lives hung in the balance. Yes, he said finally. I will go back, but not as a servant, as a partner. Within days, humanity began its return. Commander Diane led the first wave of peacekeepers. They deployed to the Dravok-Hilmar war zone immediately. Their presence was not enough to stop the fighting instantly, but it created space for negotiation. Trade Minister Ji-won returned to the council station. She immediately began working to restore the broken supply chains. She contacted her old colleagues, rebuilt relationships, and negotiated new agreements. Within weeks, medical supplies were flowing again. Food reached hungry populations. The refugee crisis began to stabilize. Ambassador Minho arrived last. When he walked into the council chamber, something unexpected happened. The councilors stood and applauded. It was not a formality. It was genuine appreciation. Vrax came forward to greet him. Welcome back, he said. We have missed you. I have missed you, Minho smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. Thank you. It is good to be back. Though I hope we can do things differently this time. We will, Vrax promised, and I will personally ensure it. The work of rebuilding began. Minho's first task was to broker a ceasefire between the Dravok and Hilmar. It was not easy. Both sides had suffered tremendous losses. Both sides wanted revenge. Trust had been completely destroyed, but Minho was patient. He met with Dravok leaders and listened to their grievances. He met with Hilmar commanders and heard their pain. He did not rush. He did not force. He simply created space for dialogue. Slowly, very slowly, progress happened. Small agreements were reached. Prisoner exchanges, humanitarian corridors, temporary ceasefires in certain zones. Each small step built a little more trust. It took 3 months, but finally a full ceasefire was agreed upon. The war was not over, but the killing stopped. Peace talks could begin. Meanwhile, the other conflicts across the galaxy also began to de-escalate. Human mediators worked tirelessly, moving from crisis to crisis. The Zentari and Colvin reached a border agreement. The Reshik and Vondri agreed to respect each other's beliefs. The Marnoth and Kelix divided the trade routes fairly. The refugee camps slowly emptied as people were able to return home. The plague was brought under control. Supply chains functioned again. The galaxy began to heal, but something else changed too. The council itself was different. Other species began to learn from human methods. Vrax started a training program for young diplomats, teaching them patience and mediation skills. Cultural exchange programs brought species together to learn about each other. The reforms that humanity had demanded were implemented. Mediation became mandatory for disputes. Diplomats received proper recognition and compensation. The entire culture of the council shifted from confrontation to cooperation. One evening, Minho and Vrax sat together in a quiet observation lounge. They looked out at the stars and reflected on how far they had come. I never understood your work before, Vrax said. I thought diplomacy was about clever words and political maneuvering. I did not realize it was about patience, about empathy, about seeing the humanity in others. Minho smiled. Actually, we call it seeing the person in others. Every species has their own version of humanity. Our job is to help them see it in each other. Vrax nodded slowly. I am learning. Slowly, but I am learning. That is all any of us can do, Minho said. Keep learning. Keep trying. Keep building bridges. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars turn slowly in the void. The galaxy still had problems. There would always be conflicts. But now there was hope. Now there were people committed to solving problems peacefully, and that made all the difference.